Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 803. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camera. You know what we do on race weekends. You know what we do.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it. Come on, Todd.
That's exactly what we do. That's right, like hyenas in the grasslands, feasting on the carcass of the Singapore Grand Prix. Oh boy, it'll be a lot of fun. But before doing that, I have to introduce my guest tonight. You know who this is.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy.
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charles, the International.
Oh boy, ladies and gentlemen, when I joined this podcast, I had no idea that I would be talking with the IMSA championship winning sporting manager for the IMSA championship winning team and driver, constructor and driver for GTD. Paul, congratulations. What an awesome achievement at the Petit Le Mans.
Oh my goodness. Talk about crazy. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was an amazing, it was a crap race for us. We had a lot of stuff go wrong, but we kept persevering, and the other people were chasing with the championship also had their own dramas, and so it was a knockout, just drag 'em, just dirty kind of race. You know, it wasn't the one the movies are made of where we come across the finish line leading the race and win championship. It was a nasty one, but it kind of went with how our season went, right? We were knocked down so hard the first 3 races of the year and just kind of kept digging and got ourselves to the top, and we kept ourselves there for one more race, which was the last race of the season. So yeah, it was a phenomenal night to finish in that manner. Everyone on the team had a hand in grappling what we could out of the race, and we just by 2 spots, I think, in the end, two positions after a whole season. That's what it all came down to win and losing. And yeah, it was good. Did the awards banquet last night and getting a little emotional. And it was fantastic. You know, we're only in the 3rd year of our program, and we've won the sprint championship and the overall now. So wow, very lucky to be a part of this team. Very lucky.
Yeah, that is awesome. And so you guys win the championship in GTD. Roman DeAngelis wins the drivers, right? Yep. And you locked it all up in there. That's awesome.
I couldn't. I mean, I'm the one in the back tabulating the points along the race, as well as a few other things, and it was like the last lap, and I'm like, and it was under yellow, and everyone's like looking at me, and I just couldn't say, "Oh, it's okay, guys, we won the race." I'm like, did I get it right? I had to wait till someone confirmed on the speaker, really, because I'm like, I don't even want to commit to that because it's been that kind of a day. You know?
Yeah. You're back there on a calculator. Okay, it says that I've got this, but I'm not sure. That's crazy. Well, huge congratulations to the entire team. Ian James is doing a great job with that team. And like I said, only 3rd year in the program, and what he's brought together as a team to come out, win the sprint championship last year, win the GTD overall this year is such a Herculean effort, Paul. And I know, I tweeted out and put it on our social media. You got a lot of love from a lot of Parc Fermé listeners and readers out there for the championship. So
even Cotton Melton was out there. He was there last year, and then John was there. He came by and saw me. And actually, Melton played a role in the race because we had a little damage on the front, and we can't get to go to the pit wall to see it or take pictures. So I asked him. He was up in turn 3 area. I said, give me a picture of the front end of the car so we can assess the damage. So
that's awesome.
So there you go. Not only coming out to see the race, you too can be a part of the Heart of Racing success if you're a Parc Fermé listener.
That's awesome. So other teams, they're happy to if it's Formula One, you're lucky if you can get close to the team. But other teams might say hi to you or sign an autograph. No, Paul puts you to work.
Yeah, put you work.
Yeah. So for the Parc Fermé listeners, if you go to a race, you're part of Paul's team. You're
That's right. If I need you, I'm going to sign you up. That's for sure.
Right.
So yeah, him and his wife and his brother were up there like they were last year, supporting us all the way.
Awesome.
So it's great to see everybody. So
yeah, that's great. Well, we're all elated for you, and I know, having known you all these years, and you're such a great friend, and I know you'd be the first person to raise your hand and say, it's an absolute team effort that every person on that team, you're a plucky upstart, third year into the program. And it takes, a Herculean effort from everybody, mechanics and engineers and Ian and you and the drivers. It just takes a collective team effort to have that kind of result. And if one link is struggling or misfire, everyone else feels it. So it's critical.
And that's, and on a team, like all teams, if someone's makes a mistake or this or that, everyone's there to back them up, not to push them down. That's a key part of it. No one's there to make themselves look better by making someone else look bad, which happens a lot in life, right? And that's just not that just doesn't work, right? So everyone's always thinking, how do we make it better? And during the race, literally everyone was involved in a lot of strategy calls and how we do this, trying to come back from a lap down, and it was so. It just makes the winning that more special to be able to win it with that kind of group of people.
Yeah. Well, it's great. What a great result. So that is very exciting. I'm as your friend, I'm elated for you. Just having watched from afar. You moving to Texas, starting with this team, start with the program, listening to the logistic challenges of getting a new Aston Martin, getting it fitted, getting all the details and the pieces and parts and people and travel and logic. And I've been obviously, admittedly, at arm's length, and not that he shares anything like that I shouldn't know. He doesn't. But anyway, it's been it's been really fun to watch this develop. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Just over the moon for you. So it's great. It's excellent. And folks, if that wasn't enough, mild-mannered Paul Charsley, who isn't always mild-mannered.
No, I'm not. I wasn't that night. There's one team in particular I'm not mild-mannered about that. I'm still working on that one. There's going to be some revenge next year, but yes. I'm not mild-mannered.
After all, he is an English boy from
That's
Essex,
right.
So
bite your kneecaps.
That's right. But if that wasn't enough, going off and being part of a championship-winning team, he did manage to go to the awards banquet last night. Probably had a few drinks and some food, and then managed to squirrel himself away in order to watch the Singapore Grand Prix so he could come on and review this for you, Paul. So
there you go.
Very grateful for that.
No worries.
I'm not sure I would be. I'd still probably be celebrating, but
well, today starts the next day of the season for next year. But so good thing is I'm close to where my dad lives, so that's why my background looks a little different. I'm up in the hills in North Carolina, just a 3-hour drive from Atlanta. So
my gosh,
nice place to go after a championship win, I think.
The picture you sent me from there was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, it is stunning. Probably is stunning.
Just beautiful. So that's awesome. Well, let's talk about the Singapore Grand Prix. It's been on a couple-year hiatus due to COVID, and so first time back. This was Formula One's first night race all those years ago. So let's do a little table setting up front about the Grand Prix. If qualifying taught us anything about moisture at Singapore at night, then we certainly saw the lesson applied on Sunday, right? As the teams were very reticent of changing onto the slicks any earlier than absolutely necessary, because it takes a long time. Look, if you live in a humid climate, you'll know this, that it's no secret that at night with 80% humidity, no breeze, no sun, the road doesn't dry out that quickly, right? It takes a little while, certainly after a big rain like Singapore had. An equatorial style rain, and that's what we saw during qualifying, which repeated itself on Sunday just ahead of the race, which prompted a delay to the race, and we can talk about that later. But and the interesting thing is, so if you've listened to this podcast for quite a while, and if you think back of when they announced the Singapore Grand Prix as a night race, One of my main concerns, you'll recall me saying this many, many years ago, was that a night race in Singapore is a tropical climate because I personally struggle with rain at night with lots of lights and the glare when I drive. And just I was wondering at the time when they announced that, I thought, man, if it rains at night pretty good, and it probably would, man, that would be difficult to see, you know? Now, as we kind of found out, thankfully, all 20 drivers are built far better than I am. So they didn't really
younger eyes.
Yeah, younger eyes, right. So it wasn't perhaps an issue for them. But I can't imagine racing with bright lights at night and the spray and everything coming off those cars.
Well, it is difficult even for the drivers. I think, who was it, Alonso? I know obviously he's the elder statesman, but
yes, he said he couldn't see the line.
He couldn't see the line, couldn't measure the intensity of the dampness of the track, because visually it was difficult. So I think it is true that with the glare and everything, it was really hard for them to evaluate the track. They could just nearly judge it by the feel of the grip. I think that race at Turkey actually gave everyone a clue not to panic and just change tires for the sake of changing tires. They learned their lesson at the Turkish Grand Prix when when Lance Stroll had a great car and then put new tires on and had a terrible car. So everyone waited as long as they could to change them at the appropriate time, which luckily for them, Russell was pounding around telling them giving them the signal, basically.
He was doing all the heavy lifting for all the teams.
Don't know why he was doing that. Yeah,
I don't know. Well, because of the rain, slow drying track, it did keep DRS locked away in the barn for most of the race. And even though they changed to slicks, they still didn't immediately deploy the DRS. Yeah. And I have to imagine that to use DRS, typically you would be offline. And I think the stewards felt that even the offline, you may have had a drying track and a drying line, but offline in the DRS sections, there was still enough moisture on the track that they deemed it not to be that safe. So they didn't deploy DRS until the very last part of the race. And we could argue that maybe that's a bit nanny state. And to be honest with you, maybe it was, I don't know, but far be it from me, Paul, to advocate for DRS.
The use of DRS. Right. Yeah. Right. We can't play both sides.
No,
right? We're never going to say, well, they should have deployed it earlier. But
I was fine without it. But whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about it, before the start of the podcast, was why didn't they start the race earlier? My perception of not starting a rain race is for aquaplaning alone, not just because it's tricky, right? And it seemed like, as far as I could tell, there was no deep puddles out there that would cause that. So I really don't know why they did it. I know we also talked about the procedure at the beginning of the week, the procedure to get a car going in the race, but we've learned a lot that we can adjust all these preset schedules and ideas through the COVID years. So I would hope they could come up with a quicker version of the start procedures to get the race going. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, that's what I put in my notes. I said, I also think the FIA ticked more boxes in the what the heck column. As fans and even people in the paddock and broadcast team were wondering if there's a way in which F1 manages, in the way that F1 manages rain, needs to seriously be looked at. Some argued amending the start procedure and the whole grid walk and pomp and circumstance. Now, there's always a difference. There's always a flip side to every coin, right? So that whole start procedure, there is a complete prep and start procedure for the cars themselves that the teams need a certain amount of time, be it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it might be, to get them all up heat cycled, etc. And you've also got sponsors that paid big money so they could walk around on the grid. And, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. It's not an easy issue, but, all the more reason I think it needs a much deeper look at how F1 can have more alacrity in challenging race situations to amend their program to ensure that ultimately the race gets ran, So there's also that notion that I don't know. You and I growing up, we had this funny notion that F1 raced in the rain. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so now I feel like the entire series is now rain limited, if you will. Well, what's
Yeah.
the point of having full wets if we're not going to run them?
Yeah, it's weird because I mean, it doesn't seem like that long ago we're having double file restarts in the rain, and now all of a sudden, there's a little dampness on my shoe, and we're gonna wait a little while.
Yeah,
It's a weird. Some of the, I mean, they're always weird, the FIA and their decision making, but recently it's I don't know. I haven't liked the way they've been going with their decision making and thought process right now. I think they're like covering their asses more than they are actually trying to put on the motor race.
yeah, I think so. They need to get Michael Massey back.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
I saw
Spice it
somebody
up a
tweet
little
that.
bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw somebody. You bring Michael Massey back. These guys are terrible. And I don't know what Eddie Everywhere is doing, but I didn't see much at this race, so I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. Well, let's jump in. Let's talk about the top of the grid. We're going to start off with Red Bull. Sergio Perez, a mighty P1, takes the victory. Max Verstappen down in a lowly P7. Max had a bad start. I think he had a anti-stall kick in, but as bad as that was, really his weekend was already compromised on Saturday.
Yeah.
When they short fueled the car, boarded that final lap for pole, and that left him starting down the eighth. So he had trouble making his way through the field from eighth. And, because it was a little interesting because we've seen him do it a few times this year already. But the track, the rain, the lack of DRS slowed a lot of that progress that he's naturally would have done in previous races, slowed a lot of that down. And he seemed to struggle with getting by the slower cars. Now you could blame that on the track, certainly. And maybe that's true. It was a combination of a lot of things at play that made it difficult for him to get from eighth back up to fifth. He did have a few safety cars. There was times he was 19, 20 seconds adrift. And so they did have a couple of safety cars, virtual safety, and then actual safety cars that did bring him back into contention for the podium, at least. But I don't know, Paul. I mean, I don't want to cast aspersions. I'm not Max, but it did seem maybe that move was born from a little bit of impatience, trying to get around Lando Norris.
Yeah.
And he was trying to pass. Unforced error from Max that dropped him back to 11th, flat spotted, had to box for new tires, put him at the back. You could argue that from the back he marched all the way back to 7th. That was a good recovery drive, but just a tough, I would say a messy weekend for Max.
Yeah. Well, yeah, him and the team, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, a little messy, but they've got it so right so often this year. It's I'll give them that, and they still came away with points anyway. But yeah, it was interesting because it wasn't even the dampness evidently that put him off. It was a bump in the road that he said the car bottomed out, which obviously if you bottom out and then that the car's up in the air on the brakes, it's going to lock the brakes up too. So it's hard to say if it was really because of the dampness or it was because of the surface that evidently no one had been there before.
Right.
He attempted it at that moment. So yeah, I mean, and just talking about the track, I mean, brutal track. I can't imagine any of these drive. I think everyone likes to go to Singapore because it's of the city. But I don't think anyone really looks forward to driving in this race because it is mentally taxing at the best of times.
Yeah.
And in the rain, with all the barriers, it's a one-line circuit anyway, with all the barriers. I think, what we saw at the beginning of the race was a lot of cautiousness because one little error, you're out of the race. And we saw, people like Albon and
Yuki.
Yeah, that's absolutely what happened. So everyone really was kind of trundling around, making sure they didn't make a mistake rather than going out and really going for a lap time. And I'm just waiting for the track to come and be a raceable track, which it barely actually did because of the situation with the rain, the wetness not really going away. But yeah, it's a long race, and I've talked to you about it before. And the track doesn't have a great flow to it because if a track has a flow to it, you can get yourself in a rhythm. And even if it's a long race, it's not as mentally taxing on you. But because it's such a stop-start change of momentum track, it's just very, very busy and very taxing the whole time. You cannot relax anywhere. And so I don't think anyone would be wanting to jump back and race on this track again next week by any means.
Yeah, for sure. And, and you add the physical side of that too, Paul, with the heat, humidity. It's, they really get dehydrated, that kind of thing. And I agree with you. I think if you needed some evidence that the track is just as Paul described it, I would offer you an unforced error by Max Verstappen and 2 unforced errors by Lewis Hamilton, 2 champions. One's a 7-time champion. So if they struggle, now they were trying to make something happen, agreed, but trying to make something happen on a challenging track like this, bit them a little bit. So that's tough, Probably adds a more highlighted lens to Sergio Perez and what he was able to achieve. He had a good start. Took the lead from Charles Leclerc, managed to hold off Leclerc when the Ferrari was at its strongest, which was really late in the race on slicks. In fact, at that point in time, Charles was hounding him hard. He could only do that for a little bit, and we'll get into why when we cover Ferrari. But Sergio was able to really pour the coals to it and claw back out a buffer just in anticipation to cover a penalty because he was under review, or it was announced that it was going to be reviewed after the race, which I can't stand. But anyway, for a safety car infringement where he did not lead, or he didn't stay within 10 car lengths back from the safety car when it has lights on. And I guess there was a couple times he did that during the race. So as it turns out, 2.5 hours after the race, we finally found out that the guy who won it actually won it, which I think is mind-numbing. But he did win it, but he was given a 5-second penalty. Well, thankfully, Sergio was able to gap out over Charles by 7.5 seconds, covered that 5-second penalty, and still retrains the win. I don't know. I've seen Sergio put in some great performances over the years, but this could mark for one of his best performances in his F1 career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The pressure you're under, the change, the conditions, you're always the first to the next corner, technically. Right. So and to judge that, it's so much easier if in changeable conditions, if you're following someone, they're your telltale if something's not quite right coming into the next corner. But if you're always the first one there, and we already talked about maybe visuals aren't exceptional there,
right,
with the thing of the whole track, then you've just got to be right on top of everything. And we've seen Sergio conserve tires. That wasn't really a part of this race because everyone was kind of doing the same thing, but we definitely saw precision from him and pace where it needed and grace under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You like my bass? You like it?
Like it a lot, Sergio.
Yeah, well done. And it was good for him to come out of some doldrums, we'll say.
Yeah.
Although, it was... Did you hear? I heard an interview with him, and he said, "People have been saying a lot of things like I shouldn't be in the team. That Red Bull picked the wrong person." He said, "And it's probably because I'm Mexican." And I'm like, I didn't even understand that comment. Do you understand that comment?
No.
Why would I? I don't get the correlation there, and I don't know. Does he feel persecuted by the press or something? Feels it's something different than literally his results were kind of making that statement. So I was a little disappointed that he kind of threw that in there, which I thought was unfounded, but maybe he knows something that I don't. But
yeah, maybe he's getting a bunch of grief. I have no idea. Well, you and I, we're old enough to remember the Rodriguez brothers, they were awesome.
Right.
Tragically, both perished racing, but they were great race drivers, and so that was back in the '60s, late '60s, and so Mexico has an interesting connection with Formula One for the Rodriguez brothers, and then
absolutely.
And then when Sergio came, I was excited that Mexico had another great driver representing and what he's been able to achieve for Mexico. And then we brought in the Mexican Grand Prix, which is always incredibly supported. And I think most people really enjoy that race. So I don't understand.
Yeah, I didn't know if I'd missed something that
Yeah,
someone had
I
said
missed it
something.
too. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. But in our books,
Either way, a fantastic ride.
yes, yes, doing a great job. Okay, let's talk about Ferrari. You got Charles Leclerc in P2, Carlos Sainz in P3. Charles had a slightly slower start. Now he started from pole, Paul, but he had some wheel spin. He lost the lead because of that.
Going through the gears, not initially,
yeah. So apparently, maybe a little more damp over on that side. I'm not sure, but going through the gears had some wheel spin. At this point, he slotted in behind Sergio, and really for the balance of the race, was hounding him as much as he could, even getting close to passing Checo late in the race. But his fronts then started to lose the grip. He fell back to 7+ seconds behind him. He said, I found this interesting, Paul. He said after the race, he said a few times kind of over the weekend that he's focused on the remaining races. Basically, this isn't his exact words. I'm putting words in his mouth, but he's basically saying that he's focused on the remaining races as really an internal exercise on race execution. And, I take that to mean that while he knows this season's pretty much over, he wants to iron out. He wants to use the balance of this season to iron out all of those execution issues, those dodgy strategy calls, the slow stops, whatever it is. He wants to use the balance of this year to iron all of the remaining niggles that this team's dealing with, the silly mistakes. And so when they field a car next year, he doesn't want any of this crap to happen that's happened this year, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good use of that time. Obviously, he's no guarantee to come second in the championship at this point with Perez, and maybe he doesn't care about that. Most people, you either win the championship or you don't win the championship, and obviously that's his goal. He feels like he's got a good chance, and that's ultimately what he's preparing for and doing everything he can. And that's absolutely what any team should be doing, is always trying to strive to get better. And we know they've had some issues. So if you can focus on them, then iron them out, then you're going to be much more powerful next year.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, finishes P2. Carlos struggled for grip all weekend on the intermediates, Paul, and it wasn't really until towards the end of the race, once they got on the slicks, then he started to find his pace and had good pace. His start was good enough to pass Lewis, but when Lewis hit the wall, because Lewis was really hounding him there. But Lewis hit the wall, gave Carlos some breathing space to sort of trundle home for a podium finish. It was kind of interesting. If there's a team, it made me wonder as I look, because, everybody knows I'm a Ferrari fan, and I look at the balance of that, and I think, markedly, he was really off the pace compared to Charles. I mean, mid-race, there was 20 seconds. I mean, he was off. And I wasn't quite sure. And I was thinking, well, maybe with Charles's front tires, once he got on those slicks and he only had about 3, 4, or 5 laps to run at Checo, and that was it. I'm wondering if there's a team that I could argue that's been hobbled the most by that technical directive regarding the underfloor flexing and all that. I'm wondering if it may be Ferrari seem to be struggling with that, with the heat in their tires, the tire wear more than Red Bull and Mercedes. So not exactly sure. And initially I was stumped at how Sergio could pull such a lead out over Charles, given that Charles was all over him. But because I was thinking the safety car sessions, I thought, well, during these safety car sessions, let them cool the tires down a little bit. Right. And then when they restart, they'd have a little more grip, maybe it restarts. But Carlos was quite a bit off, and it wasn't until he got on those slicks. And then it made me wonder, even to Max's point, these teams probably don't have a lot of intermittent running. And they knew they were going to run long on those intermittents. So I would argue that most of the teams spent the good 3/4 of the race trying to manage their intermediates, so they didn't, wear them out. And I'm just wondering if we just kind of weren't seeing Carlos struggle with the intermediate grip levels. And
I mean, we've seen a lot from a lot of teams where some of the second drivers, even Perez, and we look at Ricardo and Latifi, obviously on everyone's mind. But every driver has their own style, and even though the cars are the same technically most of the time, their own style can really affect how tire pressures come in, tire temps go up and down, managing those kind of things. If for whatever reason Carlos kind of went out of that envelope and couldn't find his way back, because they were on those tires for so long, they had no time there was no reset. It wasn't like, we'll just fix this issue with the next set of tires. There was no reset because they were out there for so long on one set of tires, and whatever he had was what he had to deal with. I know he said he was struggling with the rear a little bit. So, maybe it's just how his technique on, and as rightfully you said, they don't have a lot of running on that tire. So the drivers don't get a lot of practice on how they need to bring that tire in, and how their driving style affects that kind of tire, and et cetera, and how the setup should be, tire pressures, all that kind of stuff. So I think, he kind of got stuck with what he had at that point and just kind of kept driving with it. But when he got the slicks on, it was a reset point for him. And so that was why he was able to get maybe a little closer, if that makes any sense at all.
It did. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Let's see. Let's talk about McLaren. You had Lando Norris P4, Daniel Ricciardo P5. This is really kind of the heart of the battle of what they call best of the rest. So this is really between McLaren and Alpine. And the battle of the best of the rest really heated up this weekend as Lando jumped Alonso's Alpine at the start. Did a great job of holding Max off when the Dutchman recovered to sixth. And then when Lewis was trying to put some heat on, Lewis cooked the corner, went into the wall, damaged his wing. This handed Lando fourth. And with really at this point, he's kind of got an eye towards the podium, right? He's looking for Carlos at this point. But Carlos just had a little bit too much pace late in the race for Lando to mount a challenge to him. Lando held off a second attack from Max late by staying on the racing line and then watching Max overcook that corner, or like you said, bottom out and run wide. So this ends up, I think Lando said, basically I did all I could basically do, to finish P4, but a great result for Lando. He kind of thrives in these conditions. He's pretty handy in the changing conditions in rain. And it was just kind of interesting to see how that unfolded. When I was writing my notes, it was kind of like Lando is just out there, got the jump on Alonso, and he was there. And then it was like all this crap happened around him,
Yeah.
And he just kind of rolled into four.
Yeah, I mean, he executed a great plan by the team, and he kept his, his error column clean. Very important. And luckily for McLaren, obviously they were really shooting for a big points tally versus the Alpine team. So it was doubly important when their main competitor is not scoring points, that you really maximize and give themselves a jump, which they did. But still, Lando is really separated from his teammate and really, leading that team by pace, and all the resources are behind him. And I think steadily he's becoming a team leader rather than, just a young driver with a lot of potential, right? So,
yeah, for sure. And even Dan had a great start. Made up a lot of positions at the start. Got well up into the top 10. He did benefit from the late safety car, not about that. But when the team dove him in for slicks, Dan gambled and went with the soft tire, not the medium, like everyone else was doing. Yeah. And that actually seemed to play dividends for Dan. He had his best finish he's had all season long in P5, and so a good result. But the most important thing, I'm sure, as McLaren, they're thankful Dan did that. But the most important thing out of this is that with the dual DNF from Alpine and a fourth and fifth from McLaren, it moves them ahead of Alpine in the Constructors' Championship, which we always say is worth millions and millions of dollars, and it is. Yeah. Now it's just a handful of points, but it's game on. So if you're looking for a championship to be excited about, look at that one for the balance of the season, the battle between McLaren and Alpine. And then also you've got George Russell, Perez, battling in the Drivers' Championship. But a great result for McLaren, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the soft call. I was surprised other teams didn't go for it. judging by what we'd seen with the intermediates. I think soft was probably a better option. Although Dan still didn't quite have the pace of Lando, who was on the mediums, though. They were fairly close at the restart, but then Daniel steadily fell back. Maybe he thought, even though he had the softs and that was a good tire, maybe he had to conserve that or something. But still, yes, good for Dan to get in the points for the team. I'm not sure it was a Dan Ricciardo drive of old, but maybe it's a first step to getting his head back in it and hopefully get some momentum for the rest of the season.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, P6, Sebastian Vettel in P8. Lance and Seb both had good starts, made up ground when they quietly ran for much of the race. They just kind of quietly in that top 10-ish, ran there for quite a while. Seb had a little bit of an error, mistake up front, but then hung in there. The late safety car handed them an opportunity for a cheap pit stop. Of course, they took advantage of it. This left them well into the top 10. And so that was really good. Lance had a slightly easier time of it than Seb, because Seb had both Lewis and Max hot on his gearbox late in the race. But to the veteran's credit, he managed to hold Lewis off until the 7-time champ went wide trying to get around him. And then Seb managed to hold Max off to the very last lap. And Max was on those softs on much fresher tires. So good on Seb.
Yeah, no, it was good by both of them. Stroll obviously wasn't that far ahead of Vettel, so he benefited from Vettel's stoic fight against those guys to keep them off of him, really. That really did work out for Stroll. He didn't have to deal with that at all because Vettel was doing all the fighting. But good to get for that team also to get a double finish in the points fairly high up. I think that's important. I think that moved them up in the championship, and both drivers needed a little shot in the arm, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was a good drive by Lance. He did a good job.
Yeah. And it's like, as I said, as much as drivers probably hate driving this track, if you get a good result, it's maybe more gratifying also because you know what you had to get through to get it.
Yeah. You savor that more. And this was, I still think one of Lance's, maybe hidden in the right word, but maybe it's a not so hidden talent. I do think this guy is pretty good in the rain and changing.
No, yeah. I think he is. Yeah, I mean,
I think
that's his
really good results. Yeah,
all of his good results have come from those kind of situations.
Yeah. And so whenever it's wet or changing conditions, my expectations of Lance are going to be a little higher because I think he can deliver where other drivers on that grid struggle more than he does. I think he kind of excels at it. Let's talk about Mercedes.
Get down.
Let's see. Lewis Hamilton, P14. I got that backwards. Yeah. P9, George Russell, P14. George started from the pit lane with a new engine, so he was always going to struggle. But he had a tussle early on with Bottas that left the team with a decision. Do they stay on the inters this late in the race or switch to the mediums a bit too early, right? So this was the big gamble. They opted to go for the mediums, and as it turns out, it was a bit too early. But George eventually got his mediums working, and he was moving back through the field. But then he had this kind of odd clash with Schumacher that left him with a flat rear tire and at the back of the grid. And I watched that replay a couple times. I don't exactly know if I understand what George was doing there.
Yeah, he moved around on the straight when they were that close. There was contact, and I don't know. I think he was just having a pretty bad race. I said, once again, mentally taxing this race, definitely mentally taxing for Russell, especially when he was on those slick tires for so long before he should have been on them. I mean, you talk about if you've got the intermediates going around the wet track, you think of what you need to do with slick tires. So I think his whole race was so messed up. I think that was just like another error that kind of left from the fatigue of having to go through all that. I don't know why the team. I know I get they were behind, but I still don't understand why they thought the solution would be putting slicks on way before it was necessary. I mean, he was the guinea pig for everyone, and basically as soon as he had the quickest sector, everyone knew, okay, game is on, everyone's coming in. But that's an awful long time to be out there just to serve every other F1 team on the grid, to know when to pit for the slicks.
Yeah, it really is. It was a bit of an odd call. Lewis got jumped by Carlos at the start, and then he tried to overtake Sainz, but he overcooked it, slid into the wall, damaged his front wing. After a stop for a new front wing, Lewis did claw his way back up through the field once again, and then he had another unforced error trying to pass Vettel. This dropped him back to 9th effectively. And as I mentioned, I don't want to be too heavy-handed with Lewis, as whereas I do think in Max's case, I think he maybe just running out of patience, stuck behind Norris, right? Mm-hmm. And I think he did that. I feel like I kind of get the feeling that Lewis was just trying to get that car to perform. He was, I don't know that it was so much a patience. Maybe it was. I'm not in Lewis's head, but it was a couple unforced errors that you wouldn't normally expect from Lewis. But I kind of felt like he qualified 3rd. He desperately wanted to get that car up there, trying to make that move, and just how challenging that track wet is caught him out. But, can you be afforded that? Well, sure. Max tried it. Lewis tried it a couple times. He felt bad about messing up the wing. And Lewis is typically a little more patient, but perhaps Max and Lewis both ran out of patience. I don't know. The interesting thing for me was the amount of heat, seemingly, the amount of heat that the Mercedes were able to generate during qualifying that saw Lewis qualify well, but that didn't quite seem to replicate itself during the race for whatever reason. And there was some calls from Lewis to his team. He was saying, you guys should trust me on the call, on the tires. I think he was opting for a used set of inners. The team put him on a fresh set because I think the team said that the used sets were really knackered, and so they put him on a fresh set. So anyway, yeah, a lot of tough weekend for Lewis and George both.
But I know they were speculating on TV that he wanted wets, but you heard it was used inters.
Yeah, I later read this morning that it was he was advocating for used set of inters.
That's a clever call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the team were. Yeah, they're just tough to get the team to put a bunch of dodgy inters on instead of nice, fresh, shiny ones. But he was probably right.
Yeah, well, he may have been, and because, but I think the team said that the inners that they had, they just felt were too worn, or that's what they were worried about anyway.
Yeah,
and that's what I read. Don't write that on a rock, but that's what I read. So anyway, all right, Alpha Tauri, oh yeah. You had Pierre Gasly in P10. Yuki Tsunoda throws down an impressive DNF.
Oh, Yuki,
the Yukester, out of control. Pierre got hung out by the safety car. He had boxed just before it, lost a few positions. He did manage to claw his way back into the top 10 for a point. That was good. But Yuki, Paul, outbrakes himself, hits the wall, and it was for a fraction of a second when he did that. Did it go through your mind? Why did the team renew this guy's contract for 2023?
Yes, indeed. And all he could say was, sorry. It's like, Franz Todt should give him back some of his men. You late, rah.
I know.
Laying into him. But
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to criticize anyone making a mistake here, but it was a really tough situation. And I think that was when he'd just gone on to slick tires, right?
Yeah.
So honestly, I can nearly forgive everyone for making a mistake because I didn't see any massive mistakes, but you get 1 millimeter wrong, you get your dry tire on a wet patch that you shouldn't have, and you can't come back from it. As we saw with Albon, it's like the crash from 3 weeks ago, and he still hasn't hit the wall yet, right? So you're like, it's all in slow motion, but there's literally nothing you can do about it. You just slide to death for about 10 seconds and then the impact. So
and Alex wasn't really going that fast. He just turns in and it just slow motion to the wall, you know? Yeah, he just stuck. So I think, it's Lewis, did it twice. Max did it once. It's a little harsh to be hard on Yuki, but,
I think we're going to give everyone a pass on a little errors like that, because although they did have big consequences.
Right. And remember, I think another reason they re-signed him is, not that I'm patting myself on the back. Remember several weeks ago when it was all in the headlines that Red Bull and Porsche, that was a done deal, and Porsche was going to be their engine partner and part of the Red Bull technical engine development team and all that. And then there was also a parallel story that maybe Honda might be interested in coming back to F1 now that Porsche and Audi were, right? And I thought, that's the safety valve. And that's going to allow Red Bull to pretty much set the table they want with Porsche. And if they don't want to, it'll go Honda. So I had said that. Lo and behold, this week, I saw, a few weeks ago, they said, the Porsche Red Bull deal's off. Oh my gosh, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? And I was like, well, they're talking to Honda. That's what they're doing. Of course they are.
That's the easy button, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So of course they're talking to Honda. They already hired some Honda engineers for their development program. So that is why Yuki's there. Let's see. Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas, P11, Joe Guan Yu, a DNF. Joe had a clash with Latifi, shockingly, that put him in the wall and out of the race. That wasn't his fault. I don't know. What was going on there, Paul? I think he said, well, I looked in my mirror, I didn't see him. And
well, they're not always in their mirrors. Sometimes they're beside you, Nicholas. Actually, most of the time, they're beside you.
The call is coming from inside the house.
Yes. He's on the roof.
Yes. Yeah. So that was not good. Valtteri had basically what I would say is a midfield day, right? But his softs late in the race almost worked. Got him back up to close to the points. Couldn't claw back enough to challenge Pierre for 10th, but Valtteri said, hey, look, ultimately our pace on Friday was good. It's a good sign. He said that the upgrades that we brought should be good for Japan. So there you go. Yep. Let's see. Haas, F1, Mick Schumacher, P13, Magnussen, P12. I have no idea how Magnussen got back up to P12, to be honest with you.
Well, everyone else fell out, basically.
Yeah, basically. I guess it was all attrition. But at one point, because Kevin had a clash with Vettel at the start, and he had that front wing that was a little askew, and he wasn't happy at all about getting the black and orange fret. That was pointless. That wing was fine. Car was behaving fine. It had no reason to have to box, but he said he finished P12 with the unneeded pit stop, in his opinion. So that was frustrating, as they could have had more, or at least he felt that. And so because he had dropped back, Mick was up front, and I thought Mick, but then I remembered Mick had that, he was punted by Russell and dropped him behind K-Mag. And so that was unfortunate. He felt, I think the team and Mick felt like he could have been well into the points.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Opportunistic? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not so sure. Yeah.
I'll go with it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Obviously Mick's pushing for a seat, so he's going to always say if and but, right? But,
yeah. Because he say, had George not hit me, I was heading for a podium.
Yeah.
So, it's
guaranteed.
Yeah. Sorry, let's talk about Williams. Let's see. Alex Albon DNF. Let's see. Nicholas Latifi DNF. Enough said. Latifi hit Joe, had suspension damage, out. Albon, Alex out-braked himself, had no front grip. Like Paul said, it was like slow motion going through that corner, turned.
No.
Paul, he was almost doing the Felipe Massa understeer routine, where you get understeer, you turn more. Thinking it'll turn.
Don't do that at home, folks. Doesn't work.
Right. Paul, back in the day when Massa was racing, and I can't remember what race it was. Paul was like, Felipe, all right, take it from one driver to another. When you're turning in and you've got understeer, turning it more doesn't help. You've got to release it and get the car straight and get your grip back,
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, bad weekend for Williams all the way around. But here's the upside, Paul. Just a few weeks ago, Alex Albon was intubated.
Yeah, that was so scary hearing that, right?
Yeah, I mean, shocking that happened. And here he is, Paul, hop right back in 3 weeks later after that. All of that happened, hops back in the car. Good on him. And I feel bad he didn't finish. I was hoping he would.
Yeah. I didn't know if it was too soon. Obviously, I'm not a doctor and I don't even play one on TV, but it seemed a little too soon after you go through it.
Yeah.
Nearly a very serious issue at the hospital, but good on him. Good on, and especially coming to the most torturous race in the calendar, right?
So. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and he's like, okay, well, I've got this incision down here with stitches, and then and by the way, I stopped breathing, and okay.
Yeah.
He's
maybe
made
his
of
cat stole
stuff.
his breath. Wasn't there a movie like that?
Yeah,
what was that movie? I'll have to ask Grace what that movie is.
She's got to know that. She's got to have seen all the cat movies, wouldn't she?
Yeah, I would imagine.
We could say that. She doesn't listen to these. Let's see. And finally, Alpine, Fernando Alonso DNF, Esteban Ocon a DNF. Hey, look, hats off, man. We just got it right up front. Fred on his 350th Grand Prix, but it was certainly one to forget. He had engine failure early on. That's a shame. He qualified really well, Paul. And I thought, you always think if he's up there 4th, 5th in qualifying, that is cat amongst the pigeon time.
Yep.
And you always, you're thinking, all right, Alonso could factor, and it just let him down. And then just a few laps later, Ocon's engine.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone around him up front there was like, oh, man, that Alonso, he just won't go away,
Yeah.
Very aggravating because, he's going to fight no matter for whatever, whoever you are, whatever you're fighting for. I don't care. I'll fight you till the death. Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
No.
Yeah. All right. Let's do some awards, shall we? First one's always move of the race.
We'll do it live.
Yes, move of the race, Paul.
All right. I'm going to call it the unmove of the race.
Okay.
Which is everyone staying out on intermediates for practically the whole race.
In perpetuity.
Learning their lessons. Yeah. Not moving sometimes is a good idea. Not flinching, not blinking, as we found out. So I think the F1 teams learned that if the road is still wet, just because 20 laps went by and it hasn't been raining, doesn't mean you should come in for any other reason. So there you go.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I kind of alluded to this in the race report that I did for the website.
You have a website?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just started it. Yeah, it's a new blog. Yes, I do have a website. We've had it since 2005, Paul. I think your mug is on it, if I remember right. So anyway, I wrote on the race report, I said, typically, these wet weather races when it's raining or even drying conditions tend to throw up some kind of exciting racing because it's unpredictable. There's driver errors and it's just, but this race didn't really do that. And typically it would, but it didn't by the nature of, I think, a combination of elements. The track, as you so eloquently explained, how challenging that track is. It was drying, but very slowly. And because of that, the teams pretty much started on intermediates and knew they were going to run hella long on those. So they're just managing the intermediates, for 3/4 of the race. So really, as much as I appreciate Ant Davison talking about, well, this should make the overcut a little stronger, and he kind of pointed, I think maybe, but there wasn't a lot of strong strategy at play here. It was really everybody managing intermediates and waiting for the first idiot to put on slicks to see how they do, and then everyone would do it, and that's kind of what it was. So, yeah, it's I kind of thought there would be a little more action, but anyway. My move of the race ended up being, I did enjoy kind of the whole Seb, Lewis, and Max battle.
Yeah.
because here you've got
the champions.
Yeah, the champions, right? All three, nose to tail. You've got wily old Sebastian Vettel holding off and defending against seven-time champion Lewis Hamilton, who was trying to hold Max off, the young lion. And so all three of them are going. And to be honest with you, if I could be honest with you, I kind of thought the person that might overcook it would be Seb, because he's an Aston Martin. The car's a little more difficult than the other two, but it surprised me it was Lewis.
Yeah, and just think of all the friction that's gone on between those three guys at different times.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And Seb did a great job of holding Lewis off. Then he held Max off to the very last lap.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was only because Max was on much fresher soft compounds he got around him, but and DRS. But anyway, so that was my move of the race. All right, next award is Donkey of the Race. And there was one. It was actually more than
two. Yeah.
Two donkeys of the race. All right, Paul, what'd you have?
Alpine had to be. They blew it, literally, figuratively, and actually.
Yeah. Nobody's getting the Alan Permain Award this weekend over at Alpine. I'll tell you that. What you're going to get, you're going to, get the F out of the way is what you're going to get.
What did Martin Brundle say? Oh, he had a lot of isms. He said it was like engines like a bag of nails, but not enough to build a deck chair or something.
Something hilarious. Like that. Yeah.
That was funny.
Yeah, it was funny.
I don't know. I wonder if he writes these things down and like, when can I use that? He
might use like okay, so I've got this donkey's leg. Perfect. I love him, Martin, because I have a bunch of colloquialisms too that I get a lot of grief at my day job.
Oh yeah,
it's just because I was born and raised in Missouri.
Maybe Ed Davidson's like spinning a wheel of quotes. I was like, okay, Martin, you got to say this in this.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to fit this in the context.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of Eddie Everywhere, I think this weekend's Eddie Everywhere was will.i.am. I mean, most celebrities completely stonewall Martin on the grid. But, I mean, Martin couldn't shake will.i.am off. I mean, anywhere there was a camera, he was there, kind of, Roy. So I give will.i.am props for absolutely over promoting, because I'm terrible at shameless self promotion.
So is there going to be an Eddie Everywhere Awards?
There needs to be an Eddie Everywhere.
Maybe we
award.
need to think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good award. Yeah. So this weekend, will.i.am, Eddie Everywhere.
Okay.
All right, next award is Donkey. Did we do that? Yes, we did that. Yes. I guess you could say, if I had to hand it and be different than Paul, I could say the FIA for the whole race delay and the whole thing, and then the steward review for 2.5 hours after, and all that stuff. So anyway, difficult.
Also
all right, finally. Yeah, say it. Drive of the race. Yeah. All right, Paul.
I got to give Sergio an impressive race. I know it's easy to pick the winner, but that wasn't an easy win by any means. It wasn't an easy race to drive for anybody, but to win it under that pressure, hell of a mental exercise in strength. And good old Sergio for doing it.
Absolutely. I agree, Paul. I also had...
Do you like my pace? Do you like it?
I do like your pace, Sergio. You did a great job. So, that was my drive the race as well. I didn't even check F1.com. I'm sure he was. I'm sure. unless a bunch of people from Poland got together and gave it to...
Latifi?
What's his face? Robert Kubica.
Yeah.
Like that one time.
Yeah, that was good.
Or Kimi the other time.
Kimi won it too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Latifi would be good. Before...
Come on, Canada.
Before Latifi rides off into the sunset, everyone needs to make Latifi driver of the day just once, before he gets out. Give him a consolation gift,
Yeah. Just remember, folks, he got a super license and Colton Herta wasn't allowed.
That's exactly right. Remember that. That just shows you how talented Nicholas is. Yes. So anyway, all right. Well, that does it for this podcast. That's what we think of this race. Let us know what you think of it. A huge, huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. Could not do this and would not do this podcast if it wasn't for all of you out there supporting us. For sure. You can share your opinion. Just go to theparcfermé.com and leave your opinion. Just do it with decorum and civility as always. You can hit Paul, Grace, and I up on all the socials. And if you like this podcast, share it with a friend. Tell a friend. Because I'm terrible at self-promotion, so anything you can do. I'm going to be like Paul. If you show up to the podcast, I'm going to put you to work. So, like Paul, you show up to a race, you're working. Yeah. Like, get on that front right rear wheel. All right. So anyway, yeah, that's, so if you like the podcast, go tell a friend or 10, and you can go over to iTunes, give us some love over there, give us good ratings. We appreciate it. Paul, on behalf of all TPF listeners around the world, congratulations. Truly elated for you and Heart of the Racing. Yeah. What a great achievement. Super excited about that.
Yep.
And no time to rest. Get your butt back to work.
That's right. But yeah. Just the last thing is like race wins are race wins, but championships are everything to me. Yeah. So very satisfying weekend.
Yeah. I'm assuming Ian was really happy.
He was a bit happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was smiling from ear to ear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so much work, and just to get that reward at the end is just very gratifying and relieving. This one was a relieving kind of thing, and then we were able to build back up to it and just celebrate everything that happened this year. So yeah.
Well, a couple things. Tell me, Calvin Fish came up and said congrats. Come on, Cal.
Oh yeah. I spoke to Calvin last night. Yeah, he was one of the presenters at the deal. Right. Me and Ian, and we had a good old chat with Calvin actually.
Okay, good. And I'm assuming you probably took the call immediately from Lawrence Stroll.
No, it's funny. It was going in and out.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I can't really hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Yeah. I'm sure he'll get around to it.
I'm sure he will.
Paul, are you ready for Suzuka, the Japanese Grand Prix?
I am. I'm excited. I'm excited to go back to Japan. It's a great track, very much on equal terms for me with Spa. I mean, it's just got so much history and the track layout, and talk about a track with no rhythm versus a track with absolute rhythm. Then Japan is at it, man. And I just love it. Love the racing there. Really looking forward to it.
And Sergio, it's okay if you win this one. Mexicans can win in Japan too. All right.
I think it's
So fair enough. And Yuki, you could win and bring the house down. All right.
Oh man, they would in
Japan.
The Japanese fans. What about those?
My gosh,
what a unique bunch of fans. It's amazing. Awesome. The costumes and the
hats. And, Japanese fans are some of the best for sure.
Yeah, they are.
Well, the good news is, folks, the Japanese Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Paul and I will be back next weekend to review that with you. But until that time, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Gamber, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.